chess video, and this was a tournament game that I played this past weekend. This was a game 35, delay 5 tournament, so each side gets 35 minutes for the whole game, and there's a 5-second delay, so every time your opponent makes a move, 5 seconds runs off before your clock starts running. So I think it's kind of a in between classical and rapid time control, because if you get low on time, you're going to be in some serious trouble. So this tournament had a lot of time scrambles, but generally it's still classical in a sense, but it's definitely a faster paced classical time control. So you need to be really smart about time management. This game in particular, I found very interesting. There were some very interesting moments in it, and it was actually a very quick win on my part, but the opening phase was a little bit unusual, and there were definitely some things to take away from this game. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. I was playing an 1853 USCF rated player. I was 2012 at the time, and let's just jump right in. I had the black pieces. White plays e4. I play c5. I played the Sicilian. I didn't really have any preparation for this tournament. It was kind of a spontaneous tournament that I decided to play because it was local. But I kind of was bouncing back and forth between playing Sicilians and modern defenses and other stuff. But in this game, I chose to play Sicilian, and white goes b3, which is kind of perfect for me because I really wanted to avoid any mainline theory because I wasn't really preparing anything for this tournament. I'm comfortable playing a lot of mainline stuff, but this kind of plays to my advantage where I don't really want to go into anything theoretical. So white is obviously looking to fianchetto this dark square bishop. I don't really know a whole lot about this line, but I figured I would play knight to f6 because this is kind of in line with the Nimzo Sicilian. So if you can imagine a position where knight f3 is played, knight f6 in this position, e5, knight d5. Usually in this position, white will either go c3 and d4, white will go knight c3, white can play c4. There's really a bunch of moves that white can play here, but I figured in the game's position, after pawn to b3, knight f6, e5, knight d5, I figured that b3 probably wasn't the best inclusion in this position. So I thought this knight f6, knight d5 plan really should work quite well. And the idea is to kind of bait this pawn forward and then undermine it right away. So I kind of just went with it. I figured it couldn't be all that bad. I don't really have any theoretical backing to this. Like, I didn't know the theory of the position, but I figured it's generally a non-theoretical line. So I figured I would just play normal, solid developing moves. So bishop b2, knight c6, knight f3, all just standard development, and I go d6. So the idea here is simply to undermine this pawn, and it's not so easy to play d4 here. So white really has to kind of make up his mind with this pawn on e5 since it's a little bit overextended. White chooses to play e takes d6. I play queen takes d6. And although this bishop is opened up along the long diagonal, it's a pretty good piece. Also, you need to consider that the bishop on c1 played a role as well. Generally, once this pawn on d2 moves, it covers a lot of good squares on this diagonal. So now that I've developed my queen and my knight, I'm kind of eyeing up this f4 square. So knight f4 could be an annoying jump at some point. In that case, this bishop wouldn't be able to develop so easily because knight takes g2 would be coming. So I kind of like how this position is developing for me. And my play is relatively easy. I can make moves like e5. I can play something solid like e6, but even e5 is a really good plan. I can play bishop to g4. I really have good play. I can even consider castling queenside. I really like the way my pieces are placed right now. So white plays g3, which does make some sense because you want to stop this knight from coming to f4. And also it can make some sense if you just want to play bishop g2 and castle quickly. I think that's probably a reasonable way of playing. But once again, I really like how my pieces are controlling the center. And I play bishop to g4. So in this position, white really should probably play bishop to e2 or bishop to g2. I thought after g3, bishop to g2 was the logical continuation. But then I go e5, and I really get a good position here. I'm really just looking to develop my bishop. Maybe I'll castle queenside, maybe I'll castle kingside, but I'm really just kind of dominating this position. White is really playing the position from afar with these fianchettoed bishops, but also the pawn play isn't that desirable. So I really like how my position is going so far, and unfortunately, it's only move 7 after bishop g4, and white actually makes the losing move. White plays pawn to h3, which makes some sense because you want to kick this bishop, maybe play bishop h5, g4. Looks very, very risky, but it is somewhat of a natural move. I'm going to take on f3, queen takes f3, and white is doing probably fine there, but unfortunately, white overlooked queen to e6 check. So after queen to e6 check, I'm simply just winning because no matter how you block, I'm going to take on f3 and win a piece due to the pin on the king. So in the game, it was queen e2, but I take here. And notice you can't take back because of this pin. So you're just going to be losing a piece. A very, very, very interesting moment here. Although queen e6 is winning completely right away, I saw one of the most insane engine moves I've ever seen, and a move that I would never, ever have considered in this position. It's knight to e3. And the idea here is, the engine says the best move is to take the bishop and give up the queen, but the idea is, okay, if you move the queen over, you lose f3. If you take on e3 with the d pawn, I take here, take, and that's going to be a fork. That's going to be winning. And then if you take with the f pawn, queen takes g3, king e2, and bishop takes f3. This is just going to be a massacre. So the knight on e3 is basically untouchable, which is kind of an insane geometry that works out. So queen e2 to maintain defensive f3, but then I have knight takes c2, king d1, and I could take on a1, but the engine suggests knight 6 to d4 is even stronger. And the idea here is you're really just piling up pressure along this diagonal. If you play bishop takes d4, I can just play knight takes d4, and this pin is just going to be super, super brutal. So once again, the engine suggests to just give up the queen with h6 g4 and give up the queen that way, but I didn't think I never would have considered knight e3. Like, knight e3 is just a complete engine move, but I thought it was one of the coolest moves I've seen in quite a while. But obviously I didn't play that because queen e6 just wins right away. And then the game, I went up a piece, and then the game was over shortly. Pieces got traded. Take on c3, take on c3, g5, looking to put this bishop on the long diagonal and stop any more progress from this pawn. Bishop d3, bishop g7, rook c1, defend this pawn. I castle queenside, hit the bishop. The bishop moves, but then bishop takes c3 with check, king f1, bishop d2 hit the rook, rook moves, knight b4. Also important to note here, bishop b2 is just a fork, but I played my move too quickly, but bishop d2 is perfectly winning. And then knight takes c2, knight takes c2, bishop e4, pinning him along this diagonal. And the two bishops are just going to be too dominant here. Bishop c1, rook check, king b8, rook moves back to b1. So the idea of rook c3 check was to defend here, but I go bishop d2 here, and the rook has to stay along this file to keep this knight defended. Rook to c5 is played, and I played b6, and my opponent simply resigns because the only move that keeps this knight defended is rook to c4, but then I hit you with bishop d3 check and just take, and I'm going to be up too much material here. So after b6, my opponent simply resigned. But I thought this was a very, very cool game because I don't generally have classical games that end that quickly. And also in this position with h3, queen e6 obviously wins right away. It's a very important tactical move. When your opponent attacks a piece, always look for better options, but also I thought this knight to e3 move was one of the coolest moves I've seen in quite some time. And it shows the value of looking at things with engine. Obviously, I'm never going to play this move in a game, especially when I see queen e6 check just wins right away. But it's definitely a cool little tidbit that I took away from this game. But generally, pretty good game. Queen e6 check, it's just a blunder. Or h3 was just a blunder by my opponent. But I thought this was a cool game with a little bit of an unusual opening, and I really navigated kind of a unusual opening pretty well and just played stuff that seemed natural to me. And then I was able to get a very good position and convert for a quick win. But I think that's going to be all for this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.